Yay, we are live and recording. Hello, everyone. Okay, a big round of applause because today we are celebrating Half Sick of Shadows. You have to say it dramatically. With Laura Sebastian, I am super excited. This book is an Arthurian retelling of awesomeness, which if you come to our store, it pretty much has literally all of the things that you will like. So we cannot more than highly recommend it for you. And also to Laura as well as Alex. She's going to be in conversation with Alexandra Bracken, who you also all know. We did an event with her for lore earlier. And guys, these authors, they're both staff picks. They're both loved by the store. They're just amazing authors. They don't need much of an introduction, but I could still gush on for a long time. But I won't do that because since they are such amazing authors, you are indeed here to hear them talk about the new book. So I'll go over house rules and then I'll pass things off to them. But to the right-hand side, we have the chat section. As you see, all of the hellos. Hello back to everyone. We will be
on my screen.
Yes, exactly. The Vanna White section as we all point in opposite directions. And if you look down below, there is the Ask a Question section, which I highly recommend you take advantage of that. Events are fun because you get to actually like poke and prod the mind of the author and you get to interact with them, and that's the best part. So make sure you take advantage of that. And then also, if you have not gone ahead and purchased Half Sick of Shadows, then I would highly encourage you to press the beautiful button down below that says purchase books. You will not be disappointed, ladies and gentlemen, but you can click that and it will take you away to a magical page with all of the author's books. On that note, I'm going to pass it off to Alex. I think I forgot to say Laura wrote Ash Princess. I'm a goober for not saying that part. Okay, now I'm going to pull that step aside. Have a great event, guys, and I will see you at the end.
Thank you. Are you guys hearing any sort of echo?
No, I think you're good.
Okay, I might take my earphones out. Okay.
Oh.
Whoa. Yeah, that was so weird.
That was weird.
Why is it doing that?
Ladies and gentlemen, we bring you Alexandra Bracken from the fifth dimension.
Wait, that's...
Might be, yeah.
Whoa.
It's still echoing a little bit.
That was really weird.
Yeah, it's still kind of doing it. I don't know what's going on. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Laura.
No problem.
Crazy. Is it still bad?
All good. That fixed it.
Okay,
Yeah,
I can hear myself. It's weird. It must be on my end. But anyway, hello, I'm Alex. Sorry about the technical difficulties. You know what? Maybe that's... Okay, hold on. That's why. Thank you, Kristen. It was because for some reason I had two windows open. It literally was my fault. You guys, this has been the weirdest week. Anyway, so I am so excited to be here now that I have tortured us for minutes with that. Talking to Laura about this book. And, you know, I was just thinking, do you want to give everybody like a very quick pitch? Like, how are you pitching this book to everybody? Since I don't think I don't know if anyone's had the chance to read it yet. We're keeping things spoiler free, but be sure to leave any questions that come up. I will, after I have a couple questions for Laura myself, and then I will happily ask your questions for you guys. So just drop them in the ask a question box. But yeah, okay, so give us the quick pitch, like sell us on it.
So full disclosure, it is 3 a.m. my time because I'm in London. So like I'm not sure how coherent this pitch is going to be, but I will do my best. Half Sick of Shadows is a retelling of the Lady of Shalott in Arthurian mythology. And so if I always pitch it as like BBC's Merlin meets Circe, in that it tells the story of the Lady of Shalott, who's usually not really mentioned in a lot of Arthurian mythology. And if she is, she's like this tragic kind of sad heroine who like is like all she really does is die.
Yeah.
Like, she like sees a guy out a window, she like checks him out, and then she dies for it. And that's kind of the moral of the story. Unsurprisingly, she was very, very popular in the Victorian era was kind of at her peak. And so I kind of wanted to retell her story and reclaim her story, as well as the other women in mythology who also get a little more screen time, but neither Morgana or Guinevere really come out great at the end of it.
No.
Like they kind of get blamed for everything that goes wrong. They're passive. They're not really making their own decisions. And so I really wanted to reclaim that story with Half Sick of Shadows.
So one of the things that I was like really interested to find out about was that this was like a book that you originally, I guess it originated when you were still a teenager, right? You were working on it. You've been working on it for years and kind of like picking at it and rearranging its bones. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the like long journey that this book took to publication? Because I feel like it's going to be really inspiring for people to hear. Because everyone, I'm sure you get this question too, like, how do you know when to give up on a story? How do you know when to keep pressing on with it or set it aside temporarily? So give us the whole journey of this book.
Oh gosh. So it's, as you said, a long journey. So my first published book was Ash Princess, and that was actually the 10th book that I wrote. Half Sick of Shadows. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was a long journey. Most of those got put aside indefinitely, but Half Sick of Shadows was one that I could never quite let go of. I started when I was 17, and I think it was in part because I was watching Merlin, and I was reading like a lot of kind of Arthurian stories. And with the Lady of Shalott in particular came from one of my all-time favorite books, which is A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. That was like my intro to the Lady of Shalott. And she kind of does a really great job in that book, or she definitely does a really great job in that book of kind of like picking apart the poem and like its problematic nature, and the whole book is in conversation with that poem. And it was a really like eye-opening experience. And so I wanted to kind of more literally interpret that book. But actually the first draft I wrote, and I don't think I ever finished the draft as a teenager. It took a few years, but the first draft I tried to write was focused more on Guinevere, because that seemed like an easier access point for my knowledge of Arthurian mythology at the time. And so I tried to do that, and it just wasn't clicking for me. And so a few years later, I was in college, and I really was like, what if I just retold it from all three points of view? And at that point it was Guinevere, Morgana, and Elaine. And at this point it was also YA. Yeah. So it went back and forth a few times, but yeah, it was mostly YA. And the thing that I struggled with making it YA, and there are a lot of really great Arthurian YA books, but the thing that I personally really struggled with that was trying to make the scope of it wide enough, because it is such like a sprawling story. And so when I was writing it as YA, it almost felt like a prequel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like I couldn't manage to fit in like the actual events. So a few years later, I decided to give it a try again, and that's something I kept putting it aside. And I there were times I put it aside, and I was like, "This is just not working. I'm gonna focus on something else. Maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe I won't." And it just never really left me. So I just kept kind of coming back. And I was talking to my agent about it, and I had this idea for how to kind of tell the full story that I wanted to tell with the character development of like the early books, the YA kind of side, as well as kind of the more adult aspects. And I told him I wanted to write a book that was present tense, past tense, and future tense.
Oh, that's so cool.
Because you get the visions that are in the future. And my agent did not think I was crazy for trying to do that. And he was like, okay, so let's see what's going on. Let's give it a try. And the more I told that story, the more it made sense. And it felt like a weird thing to do at times. But I think with that, you really do get a sense of kind of like Elaine's mind, because she's an oracle. So you see kind of through her eyes, like how the past and the present and the future all kind of jumbled together.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I think it worked. So that was kind of like the breakthrough point, where I was like, oh, so this is how I want to tell the story. And from that point on, it kind of it made sense. But I don't think I was ready to write the story as it was the first few times I tried to write it. Like, I think I had to grow as a writer. I had to like really like sit with it for a while, and eventually it all worked out. I
think that's so true. Sometimes it's like the right story just at the wrong time, and you just need more time to figure out how to actually tell the story. And it's perfectly okay to do what you did, which was like play with it, experiment with it, and have it be sort of this like long labor of love. And like, look at it now. It's gotten so many wonderful reviews. It's out in the world. It's your adult debut. Did you have like any sort of, did you shift the way that you worked at all, or the way you approached writing when you were, since your first series was YA and now you've moved into adults? Did you shift the way that you wrote at all? Was it a different way of thinking, different voice? Like, how did you approach it?
It's weird because I think the question, the assumption I usually get is that it's adult, so it's like the content is more adult. And I don't actually think that's the case. Yeah. I think it's probably like in line with my YA in terms of like, if it were given like a movie rating, it would probably still be around the same. And I think it's just the journey that the characters go on, like the arc, was the real difference. I think, and I think if you ask, 100 authors who write across age categories what the difference is, you'll get 100 different answers. Yeah. But for me personally, I think YA is about characters figuring out who they are and figuring out their place in the world. And with adults, I approach it as the character knows their place in the world, and they're either trying to change it or they're settling into it. They kind of understand where they fit.
That's a great way of thinking about it and framing it.
Thanks. Yeah, even if they're trying to change it, which oftentimes they do, but they already kind of know who they are in a sense. And I think Half Sick of Shadows is a little bit sorry, my 3 a.m. brain can't remember the word.
A little bit like you were so awake for 3 a.m. I like honestly can't believe it. I feel like I'm somehow more tired than you are at this moment.
It's the espresso. I think it's a little more crossover in that because you get these flashbacks of Elaine and everyone else as teenagers. So you kind of see their like coming of age moments, but they're all kind of jumbled together. Sorry, this is my dog.
I was like, we have the dog.
The dog's on the lap. Yeah. Oh, Teddy. And I love this because my dog's name is Cersei, which is Greek mythology. And your book Lore came out this year, and it's about Greek mythology. And then your dog's name is Tennyson, and my book came out this year, and it's a Tennyson retelling. So we kind of have this is Cersei.
This is the unproblematic Tennyson. He is slightly problematic. He is a total diva, but
I bet.
Yeah, you'll have to tell me how you picked Cersei's name, but with Tennyson, it was literally, you've seen all of the old photos of him, right? Where, when he's not wearing the hat, he has these like, they're not even sideburns. It's just sort of the way his hair is, where it's sort of like curly and wiry and it sticks out and it's sort of like this shape. And when I saw Tennyson, I was like, all I could think about were those photos. When I saw him as a puppy, his ears were so big and like curly and kind of red that I immediately thought of those Tennyson photos for some reason. And that's why he's named Tennyson. I mean, I love Tennyson's poetry, but it's really like the hair.
Well, it fits him so well. Yeah. Cersei just came because I love the Madeline Miller book. And my other dog, who's sleeping in a corner, his name is Neville. So I was like, okay, so I have one like literary themed dog. I should do the same. And it just fit her. Everyone always tells me whenever I walk her that she has human eyes. Like I had someone who was like, no, she looks like a witch transformed her into a human. I think it's the poodle.
Yeah, there's like too much intelligence with the poodle somehow. My sister says that all the time. She's like, I swear to God, there's a human trapped in your dog's body, and he's like trying to communicate with you. Have you seen, not to take this on a tangent, but have you seen those dog pads where they like communicate with you by pushing buttons?
Yes, like it's all on TikTok where they talk.
I'm like, I feel like Tenny would abuse this, and Cersei probably would too. They would like really game that system.
Well, because like every time she sees me put on shoes now, she goes and gets her Frisbee because I take her to the park. And here in London, dogs can go off leash in the park totally, which is a little scary at first, but amazing. And cool. So she'll just literally every time I put on shoes, she's like, park. We're going to the park, right? So I'm sure if she had a pad, she'd just be like, park,
treat, park, park, mom. That'd be Tenny's button, mom, or idiot.
I think Neville and Tennyson would probably hate each other, but like this, because they're so similar.
Yeah.
Like they really are the same type of dog, but I think because of that, they would like not get along.
Like, please just leave me alone.
He doesn't like other dogs either, right?
Right. He's not like a dog's dog. And my mom just got a puppy, a Maltipoo puppy. And like the puppy is such I call him the little himbo. He's like a puppy. All puppies are kind of himbos, I guess. Like, weird thing to say. But he's just so like playful and loving and like tries to, chase Tenny around. And Tenny, like when he looks at him, he's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? He just doesn't know how to play, doesn't know. I don't think he knows he's a dog. So he doesn't relate to other dogs. He's probably
I always joke Neville thinks he's a human, which makes him more like a cat than a dog.
Yes.
But no, he was like that when I got Cersei too. Like he like didn't quite know what to do with her. And I purposely wanted to get a dog that was smaller than him at first. So that he would kind of feel like the alpha. And that did not work. It did not. He used to like wait for her to fall asleep and then like sneak up on her and like growl really low. But that was like they tolerate each other now.
You're not welcome here. I hope you get to the tolerate stage with the puppy and Tenny.
Yeah.
Tenny's life will be over when the puppy can jump up onto the couch. He can no longer escape it. So anyway.
That was like a whole detour into dogs.
After the dog tangent. Okay, so one of the like kind of wacky things about Arthurian lore is that there's no real canon because there are so many different versions of it, even going back to like original Welsh texts. Like it has a slightly different spin on everything, and you can kind of like trace the origins of, the stories that we know, the more like, would you say the French Romantic traditions is like the more familiar one? Not an expert yet on Arthurian lore. But I'm wondering how you approach that, because I have this issue with lore too, where there are so many different versions of each myth and like different origins of the gods. And it sort of becomes like, how do I pick and choose which one? Even like the spellings of names, like, and I know that's an issue too in Arthurian lore. It's like everyone has 4 different names somehow, except for Arthur and Guinevere. So
there's also like this weird thing that happens where characters will appear out of typos. So like there's more like there's Morgana and Morgause, and Morgana is also Morgan and Morgaine and and sometimes they're the same person, sometimes they aren't, and so it gets confusing. But it also comes from being translated back and forth from English to French primarily, but also like Welsh and like other languages, and so they're like whole characters that just pop out of nowhere because of a mistranslation. There's Gawain and Gareth are brothers, and then there's also a third brother named Gaheris who like appeared as a typo. So I found that was like my favorite thing to find out was like Gaheris just like shows up out of nowhere, and it's thought to just be a bit of typo. But
the parents just give up and
Oh.
Cersei's like, me?
She just wanted to say hi. But yeah, no, so I think I tried to focus primarily on Tennyson's poetry. So a thing that I kind of figured out early on in this process, that I always thought The Lady of Shalott was part of the Arthurian canon for Tennyson. So he has like a book of Arthurian poetry called, oh my God, is it Idylls of the King? Am I getting them confused? Okay.
Yeah.
But my 3 a.m. brain was like,
I know, I was like,
that is
correct.
And I always thought Lady of Shalott was part of that, but it's not. It's a separate poem. There is a poem in Idylls of the King called Lancelot and Elaine that also factors into Half Sick of Shadows, but yeah, Lady of Shalott is completely separate. So that was a fun thing to kind of figure out, and I decided to really try to focus on that, just to kind of keep all those contradictions from popping in. You'll see little nods to kind of everything from Mallory to like like Merlin and like everything in between. But I did kind of want to focus on that. And it's also it was a little intimidating at first because there's so many different avenues you can go down, but then it's also freeing because there's so many avenues you can go down. So I really just wanted to kind of pick and choose like everything. And so I really just decided to do what best serves the story. And it's also freeing because if nothing frees the story, I can just make stuff up because everyone else has. Why should I be any different?
It's the whole TikTok thing. Nobody's gonna know.
Nobody's gonna know. There is like, I've gotten people who are like, oh, but you made this thing up, and it's this. I don't want to spoil it because it's like a twist with Guinevere, and I'm like, no, I actually there are roots of that in the Tennyson poem that I just kind of twisted a little bit to suit my needs. And sorry, Cersei seems to see someone outside, but I don't think she does. It's okay.
The ghost of London.
I know. I think they're both just very confused right now. But yeah, so I just really wanted to tell the best story I could, even if it's not going to be like the most authentic story, whatever that means. I think if you wanted to read, Mallory, he's there. You can read Mallory. You can read any of the kind of traditional Arthurian books if you want to, but I wanted to do my own thing, and that's going to necessarily be different.
Was Mallory the one that was sort of like the trashy fiction of his age? Was it his account? I was like reading about this where it was sort of like the pulp fiction of medieval times.
Yeah, I think so. And then I think, was he the one who based Guinevere on Eleanor of Aquitaine? Like that was like so. So that's, and I wanted to kind of include a little bit of that too, because I do love Eleanor of Aquitaine. But yeah, so it's I think Arthurian mythology as it's retold is always almost like propaganda for the time. As well as something that I found out, like it really reflects its value, like the values of the time. And you see that, I think, especially with Tennyson, and how even though it's medieval, it's still very Victorian. And so I wanted the feel of Half-Sick to be kind of timeless. So there's like there's all these like little nods to like so there's like corsets, even though corsets really weren't obviously a thing in medieval, because I wanted it to kind of feel a little Victorian. And there's mentions of like, there's lots of like, I mean, people have been calling them like ahistorical, and I don't think that's quite accurate because I don't think it really has a defined time period. That was just like a personal choice that I wanted to make in the book, and I think it best serves the story. You got to do what best serves the story, I think. Yeah.
I found that so interesting that there was a real Arthurian revival in the Victorian times, specifically, I think, because of Tennyson and his work. And it like really revitalized interest, for example, in like Tintagel, a place I thought until recently was called Tintagel for some reason.
I said, what did I say? Tintagel. I said like Tintagel or something like that. I said it very wrong, and someone finally corrected me, and I was like, oh, I should.
I watched like a video of Tintagel, like a travel video, and I was like, the first time they said that word, it's like, that is the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. But it's such like a beautiful, cool, mystical place. And even that has sort of this like crazy backstory where they think it was like where ancient Cornish kings were, what's the word I'm like, coronated, like where coronations were held, and there was like Roman trading there. And then a very rich prince, which one was it, came in and like rebuilt it to like live out his Arthurian fantasy, and then it fell back into ruin. It's really fascinating. I think you're exactly right that it really is sort of propaganda for England.
And there's another town called Glastonbury here, which is like it's now primarily known for being the festival that's there. It's like the UK Coachella kind of situation. But it used to be known as being the final resting place of Arthur. Like there's like a grave. But it turns out that was just like a tourist attraction that was made up by like the church at the time that was like, come, see King Arthur's grave and give us money. And like it became that kind of thing, but it's still there as like Arthur's final resting place.
Arthurian stuff is all nobody's gonna know. It really is all
it's just one long game of telephone too, where like people are like, oh, so I heard this. And but that's the thing about oral storytelling, which is how this started. It's how Greek mythology started. So it's the original storytelling. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the way like Roman and Greek mythology intersects with like what we know about Celtic beliefs and what little we know at this point, since so much of that culture was destroyed. But I, going back to the ladies that are central in the book, it's so refreshing to have an Arthurian story that is not the Miss of Avalon, that is centered on the women in this world, because it really is such a sausage fest in Arthurian literature. It's all men all the times, and as you were saying, sometimes it's the same men with different names, creating confusion. So I wonder, like, how did you approach writing each of the different women? Because there are 3, right? It's Morgan, Morgana. Morgana, right?
Wait, sorry.
No, I was like, you use Morgana in the book, right?
Yes, which I always mess up, because now when I talk about anyone, I say Morgana, but yeah, it's Morgana in the book. Morgana, Elaine, and Guinevere are the 3 main ones. And I think like, so it's tricky to talk about now, obviously, but like, my issue with like the book itself for Miss of Avalon was it felt like it redeemed Morgan in that one, at the cost of the other female characters. And I didn't like, I didn't really connect with that. Like, it felt like everything, like all the blame was kind of still pushed on Guinevere, on Vivian, on like everyone else. And so like, I didn't want to kind of fall into that same trap. So I wanted them all to really make big mistakes. They all really make really big mistakes in this book, but I wanted to like show their intentions and show like why they thought they were doing the right thing. And then I wanted it to kind of be about like forgiveness and where the line is that you can cross. And I think they're such good friends that I wanted to explore like the complications of that friendship, because I think the better friends you are, the bigger the chances are that you're going to eventually do something that might be termed unforgivable. And then you kind of have to deal with the fallout of that. And so I wanted to explore that and explore what that looked like. And how, there's a line in the book that I can't remember exactly right now. But they talk about how their lives have kind of been shaped by Arthur's, and by trying to protect his legacy to come. And Morgana says, is that kind of my only choice, is to like bolster him or be a villain? Like, those are the only options that I have in life. And I kind of think that's the case with Morgana, with all of them kind of throughout mythology. Like Guinevere too, like she's either like his like loyal queen, or she stabs him in the back, and there's no in between. She can't be a human who makes mistakes. And I kind of wanted to explore what it looks like to be a human who makes mistakes but still is trying their best.
The Miss of Avalon really did Guinevere dirty. That's like really like, you're really right. I don't think I ever made that connection before, but it really is like,
I didn't. It was the first fantasy book I ever like, the first adult fantasy book I ever read, and then I reread it in college, and I was like, I think it's very much like a not other girls type of book, and I didn't want to write that. I wanted them to first and foremost support each other, even when they're fighting. They're still like everything. I think the thing about Arthurian mythology is everyone has to be a little in love with each other. So I think that there's that whole vibe with like the main 5 people, which is Morgana, Elaine, Guinevere, Arthur, and Lancelot. They're all like a little in love with each other, except for caveat. I feel like you have to put this caveat on with Arthurian mythology. There's no incest in it. I just want to like get that out. It's like, that's kind of a common thing in a lot of retellings, and I didn't want to go that route. So 2 people are not in love with each other. Everyone else is. But good. Yeah,
thank you. That is actually an important clarification, unfortunately, with this lore. So while you were working on this book, I'm assuming you did a fair amount of research. You're very knowledgeable on Arthurian legend in general, and I know you did a bunch of other research for setting and whatnot. Was there anything like really fun or interesting that you learned that like delighted you or made you laugh, gave you the giggles?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to Gaheris, because it was related to this. First of all, I think there's this idea that like this more modern idea that the Knights of the Round Table were like this brotherhood of like, it was very like fraternal, and everyone was best friends and like love, and that was not the case. There were like some blood feuds. Like a lot of them hated each other. It was really like a like a Real Housewives of the Round Table kind of situation. Like there were like back and forth feuds. So anyway, Gaheris comes into this, and I'm going to get the details very, very wrong, I'm sure. So Gaheris's family, whose surname is escaping me, had like a blood feud with this other knight, Lamorak's family.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And I may be saying that name wrong now that I'm thinking about it.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It doesn't sound right now that I'm saying it, but I will take your word. So Lamorak decides to kind of escalate this blood feud by sleeping with Gawain, Gaheris, and Gareth's mother, who is Morgause in this version of mythology. So Gaheris, this is the only story, by the way, that Gaheris like features as like a solo person. He walks in on them having an affair, and he realizes he can't like kill Lamorak because that would be like against the code of brotherly honor that he's like the knights. Right. So instead he beheads his mother and lets Lamorak get away. And so like that was like the really big like, I was like, oh, that kind of sums up a lot of Arthurian mythology in a way. It's like, oh no, he had to do the honorable thing and, you know, let the actual like perpetrator get away, but he's going to behead his mother.
Yeah, and somehow the woman still suffers.
Yeah, right.
That is amazing and horrible, and I kind of love it. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I feel like you were saying, so much of the Arthurian legends got really romanticized in every way and kind of whitewashed to be this like, you know. But it's so much more interesting when there's that fighting and that pettiness and that squabbling, and also people like trying to be better and failing at that and all of that. Aaron? Yeah. Oh. Knights. I'm realizing I think it feels French.
Only red. Yeah.
I'm okay. This has been a recurring theme with all of my my video chats. Like all of the virtual events where I'm like, I have never said this word out loud before.
I've learned something. I was joking because I had a lot of the people who read Half Sick of Shadows early were spelling Lady of Shalott like shallot, like the onion. And so I did like a gentle correction video on TikTok, and I was like, it's not me judging you. I pronounced epitome wrong until I was 22, and someone finally corrected me because I said epitome.
You know what though? Literally, that's how it's spelled. So
it is. And like, I think when you learn more words by reading than you do by having conversations, as many of us bookish people did, it's kind of natural to kind of have those really big mess ups.
Do you guys agree with that? Do you have any words that constantly trip you up like this? Because it's weird sometimes. I mean, like when is epitome going to come up in conversation? Kind of naturally. I don't know. But anyway.
I'm also really terrible at correcting people. So I actually have a funny story about Half Sick of Shadows. So I was going back and forth with my editor, my agent, trying to figure out like the right path. And so I kept sending him pages, and we'd have conversations on the phone. And he always pronounced Nimwe's name wrong because it's Nimue, which is a really tricky name. And I never wanted to like correct him because I hate correcting people. And so in one, there's like a draft of the book where it made it into the final cut where when Elaine first hears it, she's like, "Oh, it's pronounced Nimue," and like I like had to like spell it out. And it was like because it wasn't like about him at all. It was like I knew that it was going to be a very common misreading of the name, and I misread that for a really long time.
Yeah, you get it set in your mind. Like when I was working on lore, for some reason, I kept adding like an extra syllable vowel sound to the word Aegis. I would say Aegeus for some reason. Yeah. It's like not even close, but it's weird how your brain sort of like latches on.
Yeah, and it like moves letters. It's very
so like your brain still basically gets the whole gist. It just
Okay. Oh, but then here
we have some audience questions. So we're gonna dive into that because we've been chatting. This is Mysterious Galaxy's worst nightmare, and she's like, we're gonna be going for 2 hours. Okay, let's see. All right, Oh, okay. So this one is from Mysterious Galaxy, but it was the one that got the most votes. What scene or section gave you the most joy to write?
Oh, so and this isn't a spoiler, but it's very early on. And I think it really, you see how it ties in, I think, with my inspiration from A Great and Terrible Beauty. But there's a scene, a Morrigan scene, which if you're unfamiliar, it's, I think it's Gaelic mythology, which is another word I said very wrong for a very long time. But it's the washerwoman, the woman who collects the bloody shirts from the dead soldiers and washes them, and that's how they die. So I managed to work that in as like a vision of the future. It's like, I think it's like the second vision in the book of like, and make Morgana the Morrigan. And that's one of the scenes that stayed. I think it's probably one of the oldest scenes that made it into the final draft, because it was such a fun, like vibey scene. I can't think of like the more appropriate word, but
it's like the
vibes. Yeah.
Bloody shirt.
And yeah, so that's definitely my favorite. And then also just like the intro, the scene I remember writing and being like, oh, this is the book I want to tell is, again, it's a very early scene. And for a long time, it was the first scene, which is when Elena's in the tower with her mother. And it's like the intro to her and her mother. And that relationship was really fascinating to me, and what it would look like to have a mother who like never leaves her tower and like lives through you. And I just wanted to kind of explore that dynamic. And so, and who they're keeping this huge secret, which is that they're both oracles. And they have to hide that because magic is not allowed. And so that was the moment when I was like, oh no, this is the story I want to tell. And we shifted gears and it became what it is. And for a really long time, it was the first scene in the book because it was told sequentially. And now it's a flashback. It's a pretty early on flashback, but it's a flashback.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's the interesting thing about Celtic legend and mythology. It's sort of like, there are theories that like Morgan's character derives from Morgan. Is that how you say it?
I always said Morgan, but I mean, again, we've established.
It's confusing, but it's so interesting. It goes and goes. Okay. Kristen asked, I always love author recommendations. What have you read recently? Or like, what are you currently reading that you would recommend? And then she asked to follow up, what book should everyone read? Like, what's one book? So I finished For the Wolf by Hannah Witten recently, and I loved that. It's just, I think she talks a lot about how like she wanted it to kind of read almost like fan fiction, where it's like that instantly compelling, like the relationship between the characters is like at the forefront, and it's immensely like it's unlike any other like fantasy book that I've really read, and I really love that. I think it's fantastic. Right now, I am reading. What am I reading? I'm actually going back into like, I think I'm getting a little nostalgic. So Mercedes Lackey has like the 500 Kingdoms series, which is fairy tale retellings. And I was talking about it with someone, and I was like, I only read the first one of those. Now I'm going back and reading them now, and I'm reading One Good Night. I think it's the second one, but they're the magic system is really fascinating in that, and it delves a lot into stories and how they're passed on. And so I think that's like a classic, but an amazing one. And I think it's one of her lesser known books. It's a very long series. I don't think there are 500 books, but there very well could be. It's also interesting because they're loosely related, so you can read them out of order. And they're very, what's the word I'm looking for? They're still interconnected. The magic system is the same, and I find the magic system in it really fascinating, which is everyone's life. And it kind of ties in a little bit with Half Sick of Shadows, because like everyone's life has a preordained path that like is in line with classic stories, and how they fight that, how they go with it is kind of up to them. And it starts with, I think, the fairy godmother. It's so, we don't really write series like that anymore, do we? Where the stories are kind of more loosely interconnected versus, direct sequels. I feel like direct sequels have ruled for so long.
Yeah, and it involves an investment that I think I don't always have in me as a reader. where like sometimes I'm like, I just want to jump in the middle and like meet some new characters and yeah.
Have
and
you
then
guys read any? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
I was just going to ask everybody if they'd read a series like that recently. But keep going. Sorry, tell us more.
I'm trying to think of like any like what I would say Great and Terrible Beauty. Honestly, the Gemma Doyle trilogy is a book I think everyone should read. It's one of my favorites. All these years later, and like I also Libba Bray's other series, her newer series, The Diviners, is just it makes me angry when I read it because it's so good. But like I'm like, gosh.
Oh man, I remember so vividly because like Laura, I think we're roughly the same age-ish. Like we're very close in age. So like you and I kind of grew up in an interesting time in YA where I feel like Twilight didn't really hit until like I was going to college. Like I remember going and getting the second one newly released when I was a sophomore maybe in college, something like that. But I so remember going into Barnes & Noble my like junior and senior year of high school and like seeing a Great and Terrible Beauties cover and like loving it. It's just so beautiful and so eye-catching. That was like my first book cover that I like really fell in love with.
And I remember at the time I really loved historical and I didn't think I liked fantasy. I think because I was always told that it was like for kids. And as a teenager, I wanted to be like, no, I'm not I'm a grown-up. I read grown-up books, so I'm going to read historical fiction. And I remember looking at that and I picked up a few times and I was like, oh, it's fantasy. I don't want it. And I'm trying to move away from fantasy. And then I finally gave it and read it and I was like, this is the most amazing book. And that was really like the start of my delve into like all things fantasy. And I regret putting it off for as long as I did.
It can be really intimidating to like get into reading fantasy. I still sometimes have a harder time reading high fantasy because I feel kind of overwhelmed by the amount of world building. But
and I think it really depends on like no one in my family reads fantasy. They read my books. Thank you. But they didn't really grow, like I didn't grow up with fantasy. It was not like something that I had introduced to me. Like my parents didn't give me like Lord of the Rings or like any of those things. Like I think I had Harry Potter because that was like a cultural touchstone for our age. And but yeah, it wasn't like I wasn't really indoctrinated into fantasy at a young age. So I had to kind of come to it more organically and a little later.
My dad was a huge fantasy reader. He loved the Lord of the Rings. He had like, we were going through some of his old things and like, he had all of the original Frodo Lives merch from the 70s. Like he has like some crazy record of like J.R.R. Tolkien, like reading poems connected to the, so he would like reread the Lord of the Rings trilogy all the time. And he read a lot of like mass market paperback like fantasy, but I really still to this day am not super into fantasy. But I will say, I'll give you really quickly, then there are more questions that we'll get to. The book that I read recently that I really love, if you guys haven't read it, is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. Amazing. Like such a fully realized world, and the characters are so wonderful, and I like was sad to finish that book and to like leave that cast of characters behind. If you haven't read it yet, highly recommend. So okay, next question. What secondary character was the most enjoyable to write, and which one presented the most challenges?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define secondary, because if you're looking at it where like Elaine is the main character and everyone else is secondary, then I would definitely say Morgana. But I do kind of consider her a main character. So maybe Nimue, because she's like so all-knowing and also just like kind of shady a little bit. Not intentionally so, but like she's definitely like, you get the feeling early on that she's not telling everything she knows. So she was a fun character. I would say Merlin was the hardest, which is kind of like the opposite side of that. That like coin. And I think, I think people have such firm ideas of who Merlin is. So I think I kind of took it in a completely different direction with him. Where I think I feel like he's like, oh my God, why can't I remember the term? That not chaotic neutral. I feel like he's like true neutral as a character. And so that makes him like really like unpredictable to write in a way. So and he's not a very big character. He's not in it for, I think he's only in a few chapters.
Yeah.
But he was definitely the most difficult to get a feel for, and his role definitely changed over the last 14 years. Like he was definitely a more main character earlier on. And then he was on, like, so right now he's like a fixture in Camelot. He's like a court sorcerer in the final version, but earlier on he was like in Avalon with them when they were growing up, and so I had to kind of reevaluate his role. Lawful neutral. Someone said yes. Yeah. That's the term I was looking for. Yeah, that's again 3 a.m. brain. But yeah.
Who did you really love writing? Like who did you? Yeah.
I think Morgana. I think Morgana was my favorite because she gets to be like, she's like the snarkiest. So like she like really gets to be a little bit, and she's like very open. She's like, I don't care about anyone except for like her like 4 friends, and like everyone else she does not care. And so that would make her really, really fun to write because she just gives 0 Fs. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, so I'm just gonna keep it. Yeah.
This one's from Emma. What is a scene that you were most sad to cut? I'm assuming it's almost more, not that you weren't cutting things, but it's almost more like you were scavengering from the bones of earlier drafts. Is that like a sort of an accurate description of what you were doing?
It is. And I really tried to I tried to keep a lot in. So I will say, speaking of Merlin, in an early draft, there's a legend where Morgana like turns Merlin into a tree.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I managed to put that in an early draft, and it no longer, like, there's no way I can make that really work in the final draft. So I did have to cut that, but I did really like that. That was a fun legend to use. Yeah, just he did in the book, he did as well. And I'm trying to think what else. Oh, I had this whole plot with changelings for a really long time that again it no longer really fit in the scope, but I was sad to lose that. And it's really funny actually, because when I just read it most recently for Final Pass, I noticed that there's like shadows left over where like I put something in and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a clue for a thing to come, and then the thing never comes. But like if you don't know, you won't notice. They're like Easter eggs just for you, really.
Well, it's just a red herring,
Exactly. Also, the other thing, Accolon, who in mythology is the son of a king, and he and Morgana have like a ill-fated romance. Yeah. He was a main character in some early drafts, and his role is he's a very tiny little part in Half Stick of Shadows, and I do kind of miss him as a character because like he was fun as a main character, but it just didn't work. You have to kind of tell the story in the best way. But yeah, so lots of things, but
yeah, I mean, how do you make decisions like that when you're writing? Do you go like mostly on gut instinct? Do you need like a second opinion? That's something I still really struggle with. I almost always need a second opinion if I'm feeling like uncertain about keeping an element or character, or cutting them or merging them, or
yeah, it's definitely tough. There are certain things I go on gut instinct, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna try writing it this way. If it fails, I'm the only one who knows, and I can erase it. I don't know how people used to write on typewriters, because like so much of my process is just like, I'm just gonna write it the way I want to write it, and if it sucks, I'll just delete it.
Oh my gosh. Or like Nicola Yoon writes her first drafts out by hand first in notebooks. I'm like, how?
I could not do that. So much of mine is just like throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. And I feel like, but I love being able to kind of just email my agent and be like, hey, so I'm having a really tough time with this specific little like knot. Can you help me unravel it? And and he's like, yeah, let's hop on the phone, and we just have like a little talk about it. And usually at the end of that, I have a clearer scope on things. Awesome. Oh yeah, someone sees the sun is also a star. Speaking of Nicola Yoon. Also, Six Crimson Cranes came out today too, and that's amazing.
What came out today?
Book recommendations: Six Crimson Cranes.
Oh,
by Elizabeth Lim.
Yeah,
I have the art, but the final copy is really pretty.
Speaking
of books,
The UK, is that UK art? Because they do beautiful arcs.
No, I think it is because we have the same UK publisher for YA. So I was like, it is a UK arc. They do, the arcs are like special edition in a way. Like they intentionally make them very different from the US, which they put like the reviewer's name, especially printed on the covers. And I was like, that's so they don't throw them, like give them away, isn't it? It is cool though that they think about it that way. Cindy Lou asked, I'm going to just summarize this. No, I'll read it. It's not that long. Sorry, Cindy. As someone who has read and collected Arthurian fiction for more than 40 years, I'm fascinated. That's amazing. I'm fascinated that today's young authors seem to have rediscovered the Arthurian legend. Do you have any thoughts as to why this might be such a new hot fictional topic? So I think it feels new at the moment because so many of us kind of have it in our DNA from like growing up. Like even if you don't like read the older stuff, you kind of you know about like Arthur and Lancelot and Guinevere, like you know that love triangle, you see so much of it reflected in the things you read, even if it's not in a direct retelling, that I feel like in some ways it's just in people's DNA. And like I said, it's always kind of been propaganda for the time, and I think we're at a moment now where it kind of fits in, and you can kind of retell it with the current landscape in mind, and it fits because it always fits, because that's why it's the tale that it is and has the history that it does, is because it fits so well in with humanity's kind of natural instincts in a way.
Yeah, I think it's so cyclical too. I was thinking about this because I've noticed it's like pure coincidence that lore came out in a year where there were like a surprising amount of books that use Greek mythology or retold stories. Like Ariadne came out recently.
I'm using it as a laptop stand right now, actually.
I've been so bad about my reading for pleasure. If I didn't run my little book club, I don't think I would read anything. It's like, I don't know what's happening to my reader brain, but so I have to get to that one still. But I think it's like also, in times of kind of like stress and uncertainty, you kind of like fall back on things that are more comforting and familiar. And I feel like it's just sort of the right time, plus a combination of everybody sort of reassessing these older stories, having just gone through like a transformative time in society, I would say. But since we're almost out of time, I have two last questions for you. These are from moi. The first is, what is like one thing you really want readers to take away from Half Stick of Shadows? Like what's the heart of the book to you that you are hoping that readers connect with emotionally? And then the second question is, can you also tell us a little bit about your upcoming YA book? Because that's coming pretty soon too, right?
Yeah, February 1st. So I'm excited.
I'm sure it'll be here before. Really cool.
Thank you. I do. I'm supposed to get ARCs, I think, in the next couple of weeks. I wish I could show it to you, but you have to Google it. I'm very happy with that. So the thing I hope people take away from Half Stick of Shadows is so I think at its heart, it's a book about anxiety and depression, and I think you really have to dig to see that. But I think that is kind of what went into it, and I hope that people whose brains work kind of the same way mine does, see themselves in that.
Yeah.
And as for Half Stick of Shadows, it is Castles in Their Bones. Castles in Their Bones. Castles in Their Bones is out February 1st, and it is the start of a new YA fantasy about triplet princesses who have been betrothed since birth to the princes of the Surrounding Kingdoms, and now that they're 16, they're setting off to marry their betrothed who they've never met. They've just kind of exchanged letters, and unbeknownst to the princes, their real goal is to bring down the countries so that their Empress Mother can take over all of them. And it's loosely inspired, because I do love history. It's loosely inspired by Empress Maria Theresa of Bohemia, who basically sent all of her children off to these like advantageous marriages. And they all met with like horrible ends. And the most famous of them is Marie Antoinette. But there were others too that like had like they all had just like terrible luck. And so I kind of wanted to,
and I don't love the terrible fates part for anyone, but I
wanted to reclaim this kind of narrative because like I loved the Royal Diaries growing up. I'm sure, like we said, we're like the close in age, and I'm sure you remember them. They had these gorgeous like gold pages and like the ribbon bookmarks, and they were these diaries of like famous royal princesses, and I loved them, but they were always like, oh, and she's going to go to this new country and meet her prince. And like, it ends on a happy note. And then you read like the afterword, it would be like, and then she died horribly. Yes. It's like Anastasia, it's Marie Antoinette, it's Mary Queen of Scots. And you like, and they all end on like a hopeful note. And then you read like the epilogue and you're like, oh.
Yeah. I do remember that. And I was like, I had to stop reading these books and return to like horse girl books for a while.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of reclaim this kind of narrative of these often like young teenage girls who are sent to these like strange countries where oftentimes they didn't speak the language, they didn't know anyone, they were considered enemies in some cases because they did so recently been at war with those countries, and they were often miserable and like ostracized, and I wanted to kind of reclaim those stories and make them again. I think there's this common theme in my work where I want to give agency to people who historically have not had agency, and so that's kind of where that comes from.
Marvelous. Well, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you, Laura, for this genius book. I'm like so excited to read it. It came today at like my pre-order landed, and I was like, yes.
Oh, yay.
Okay, instructions from Mysterious Galaxy on how do you order Half Sick of Shadows.
Because we are indeed at the witching hour, and it is my time to get to come and tell you all. Imagine my book that is sitting at the bookshelf. But Half Sick of Shadows is officially out and on shelves today. And if you order it through Mysterious Galaxy, you can also get a book plate, which is also very exciting. So you get a special little touch for yourself for the book. And if you look on my screen, it's below you, Laura, but there will be the purchase book button right down there for everyone.
Oh, yes.
And and really quick before we do sign off, because Alex is amazing, so she covered all the things that I normally would ask for a wrap up, but so that people can stay up to date, my final question will be, where can people follow you on the social medias or website, carrier pigeon, whatever be the best way to keep up to date with what the two of you've got going on?
I think Instagram is probably the easiest. I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok these days. And
you have such a good TikTok. I'm like, you need to teach me how to use TikTok.
I have so much fun. I did actually, if you, in the vein of House of Shadows, I did a Real Housewives of Camelot video. That was like the most fun I've had making TikTok. So please watch that. Instagram is probably the easiest. I'm on TikTok too, or on Twitter as well, but I'm not so present on there as I am on the other two. And on Instagram and TikTok, it's at Laura K. Sebastian, and Twitter is Sebastian_LK, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm at Alex Bracken everywhere. My website's alexandrabracken.com. And I would like to apologize again for my crazy, weird echo-ness, but just consider it a little touch of mystical vortex action. Sorry.
A magical event. If there wasn't some technological interference, it's just a sign that magic is in the air for us.
Exactly. Mercury isn't even retrograde. I have no excuse. Sorry, guys.
Well, on that note, I'm like, I don't want to say goodbye because this is such a fun event, but it is at that time, ladies and gentlemen, where we must bid you either good morning if you are in London, or if you are in the States. But wherever you are, thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you on the next one, and goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Fare thee well.
Fare thee well.